Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Logistics Executive TV. Joined today by a gentleman hailing from, I think he's in Chicago, but we're talking about somebody who has got an extensive career over a number of decades in the consulting industry, first of all, Accenture, Boston Consulting Group, and a number of other large organizations he's been involved in, but more recently, in the last dozen years or so, he co-founded an organization called Vector Global Logistics. And of course, we're dealing today with a gentleman who's got extensive global background and travels a lot, and would like to talk today as well about tariffs. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce Brian Oxley, co-founder and MD of Vector Global Logistics. Brian, thanks so much for your early morning and joining us all the way from is it Chicago or Atlanta?
Chicago, from across the globe, right? So
welcome, brilliant.
But no, hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show, and of course, very very well known to your business partner, Enrique Alvarez, who's been here in the Dubai office with us last year. Came and visited. It was good to catch up with him. And we have connections with him through his podcast as well. So maybe you can give us a bit of a heads up on the business, on Vector Global Logistics, and then we can get into some of the more topical stuff that's going on in your part and my part of the world.
Sounds perfect. So Vector Global was started by myself and Enrique about 12 years ago. We had met each other at the Boston Consulting Group, knew that we wanted to leave and do something more entrepreneurial and to be able to scratch that itch. Looked at a bunch of different industries and felt that we could make a solid difference in the logistics industry. So taking that approach, we launched Vector Global in the US at the time, took the model of taking time and location out of it. So empowering the employees to work whenever they want, how many hours hours a week they want to work, just as long as they delight the client. And so moving into that piece, we were well positioned moving into COVID when everybody went to remote workplaces, and for us, it's been a very successful recipe. So, and we've been very fortunate, but we've expanded beyond the U.S. and in Mexico, Chile, Peru. We recently opened an office in the Ukraine, and have staff in the UK and throughout Asia. So.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's quite a spread. So would I be right in saying you're probably one of the most dominant or larger freight forwarding organizations throughout LATAM area, yeah?
Yeah, we are. Fortunately, we are. So
okay. Awesome. Yep. You folks have a pretty high profile online. Now Enrique leads your organization, Logistics. So he's got his own podcast channel. He's a guest on the world's biggest supply chain online service, which is, of course, the boys up in Atlanta, Scott Lutton and his team up there at Supply Chain Now as well.
Yep. It's worked really well for us to serve as a platform to talk about what good things that people and companies are doing across the globe, and how is logistics a key part of that.
Sure. Okay, so you and I had a bit of a chat yesterday, and of course, very topical subject just around about at this time of the month, with especially your administration, but also globally, of course, because we're in such a connected world. But the issue of tariffs, which has been playing hot and wild on podcasts all around the world. Interested to really get any initial takes from you. We're early into this whole cycle by the look of it. We've had some big news in the last few days with the toing and froing between the US and China in particular. We've had the initial blast of the administration's tariff pitch across the world, and then a bit of a pause. So just some thoughts out of the top of your mind as to how it's happening, what the impact's going to be on us in the logistics world in particular across supply chains. Any thoughts you've got straight off the bat?
Yeah, so to begin, it seems like the only constant is change these days, right? So
always has been.
Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting, right? So we have so many clients asking and consulting with them, and I'm sure you have the same thing around, what do you think is going to happen? And the way that things have played out with the tariff run and and the constant changes where there's a tariff and they pull back, another tariff and then pull back, with the exception of China, obviously. It's been difficult to say the least. So every as we started it, as you recall, we announced a 10% and then announced a 20 and then started going back and forth on a tit for tat with China. The first 20% was obviously relatively manageable with a lot of the importers in the US. What they would do is they would go and talk to their suppliers and say, how can we ease this pain together? Which was obviously the goal of the administration, to try and push a lot of the value from China or foreign countries into the US. But obviously, since then, it has escalated to the point where it's become no longer viable to ship a lot of products coming out of China. And there's been a big pause on freight until people get clarity. So you look at stuff that's on the water that is grandfathered in, at least for the time being, as long as it's entered within the country by a certain date. You're allowed to apply the old tariffs, and with the new ones coming up, as they've been recently announced this week, a lot of companies are saying, look, and really looking at their books and saying, if I'm going to import a container that's a couple $100,000, but I have 154% tariff on it, I can't afford it. My clients can't afford it. We're just going to hold off on importing that freight until we have more clarity as we move forward in time. But it's definitely realigning the supply chain as it stands right now, and trying to figure out how people can become more tariff efficient. Where can they move production, which obviously it doesn't happen overnight. It takes decades, but there's obviously a lot of turmoil in the market.
Yeah, I guess you touched on a few different points there. One of them, of course, is the fact of, you just mentioned at the end of what you were mentioning about nearshoring, and the fact that so much nearshoring has taken place, especially since COVID. But even since then, beforehand, if you take the automotive market, for example, we all know there's been a lot of movement there out of a lot of different parts of the world to get closer to the US market in particular, and end consumers. But given that the American market is the biggest consumer market in the world, in a lot of ways, on many levels. So Mexico, we've heard about the conflagration going on with Canada, a little bit more spicy up there at the moment. I'm sure that must settle down at some point. But as you say, it's making these changes to try and adapt to what might be likely to happen long term takes years and decades to arrange supply chains or to manage what are the economic levels that are being dealt with in tariffs.
Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When COVID hit, obviously COVID was its own animal, right? Where it was just importers were having issues landing product in the US. And so once you got on the tail end of COVID, the mindset was, as you mentioned, to move from offshore to nearshoring. And we were moving, relocating plants from Asia into Mexico to take the ocean freight component out of it, from both an expense and a delay standpoint, or potential expense, potential delay down the road, and to be able to take care of the free trade agreement or be able to move on the free trade agreement between Mexico and the U.S. But for now, with the automotive tariffs that are in place, a lot of automotive companies are putting a pause on that as well. So I think it was Infiniti who's manufacturing their SUVs in Mexico. They've put a pause on 2 of their models from entering the U.S. market. All the Audi SUVs that are coming in from Germany, Audi has said, look, we think we have about 2 to 3 months of inventory within the dealerships. We're just going to put all the cars in a foreign trade zone as it lands on the East Coast, and we're going to hit and leave them set there until we figure out what we're going to do with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's I guess one of the interesting factors is the issue of, and what a lot of people won't be aware of, is there's been tariffs around for as long as business has been in place, right?
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And tariffs have been around for decades, and it is a way of somewhat leveling the playing field. But I think our current administration thought is we're going to help pay down the deficit by using other countries' money, right? But Not necessarily the case. There was a study that was done on the first round of tariff increases during Trump's first term. And when they looked at it, on average, it was about a 20% increase on the items that had a tariff that was applied to it. And when the research it was done, of the 20% of the tariff increase, 19% of that was shouldered by the US consumer. And so it wasn't the foreign governments that were actually paying, it was the actual consumer that was sitting in the US that was paying for these increases. And so you look at how things are playing out now and looking at what the price and how much is it going to impact the consumer's wallet. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday around Walmart gearing up for holiday decorations and importing decorations for the holiday season. Well, one of their manufacturers in China that was interviewed said, we go through the manufacturing process, we package it, and the last step before packaging it, we put a price tag on it, load it up, and ship it to the US. Well, they manufactured it, it's now being held, and B, they're boxing everything up without price tags. So come Christmas, we'll see how good Santa Claus is. So
Yeah.
but it all depends on how much people can afford, right? So
Sure. Yeah. It's all relative, right? I mean, you're very well connected yourself, Enrique, and the rest of your senior team are very well connected with other owners, fairly large scale freight organizations in the US, and obviously because of the nature of the world globally. So what's the talk been over the last few days? I mean, this is a fast evolving scenario. What's the general chat been about what the sort of short to medium term effect and how this might play out? Is there a general feeling? I mean, some of the people, I was at an event, as you know, last night, talking to a couple of our major clients, ports and terminal operators in particular. And there was some themes came through there, which I'll share. But from your perspective, what are you hearing in terms of general feel about how it's likely to play out midterm?
Yeah, so a lot of people are obviously starting to feel the pain. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market, and a lot of the importers saying, we're going to pause for a moment and see how this plays out. We need time on our side. And we've had a good share of our clients say, look, I can't afford this price increase or the tariff increase. I need you to stop any container that's being moved. I need you to go in and pull containers from the port from China and we're just going to store them and hold it until 2 to 3 weeks down the road. Hopefully we'll be in a better position. Now on the flip side, it's creating a lot of spikes in the market when it comes to price and capacity. So when the reciprocal tariffs were coming into play, we had a large electronics client out of Korea that said, as it stated in the executive order, anything that's on in transit prior to, at least at the time, April 9th, is going to be exempt from these additional tariffs. And so we were booking air freight like crazy to try and get product in the air. And it didn't matter if it was destined for the US or what the routing was. We knew we obviously had to eventually land it in the US, but they wanted it up in the air as it was moving to try and just avoid or to become more tariff efficient, or I guess for lack of better words, avoid the impending reciprocal tariff. So, but there's definitely a lot of moving pieces, and it's key to be nimble where you can as a BCO.
Yeah, a lot of the chat around the table last night with folks and some of the clients that I was dealing with, say terminals and ports in particular, was that there was a feeling that as much as this was about economics and trade and the tariffs accordingly, there was a fair bit of feeling that there were no Americans around the table, I might add. These were mainly just Europeans and Asian folks, about this whole issue of China versus, or America versus China, and the levelling up of the competitiveness and just the quid pro quo, or lack of the quid pro quo. For example, Chinese companies being able to purchase land in America and owning one hell of a big chunk of America, and in particular around specific sites and particular vulnerable, interesting infrastructure, you might say. Whereas it's, of course, impossible for Americans to buy land, as I understand it, in China. So, I mean, there was a feeling around the table as the evening went on that, as much as anything, there was a fair bit of emotion and a fair bit of this levelling up feeling, not necessarily just about trade. Heard anything of that nature, or is that just scuttlebutt?
No. I think that's exactly right. And we had seen all this tit for tat that was going back and forth with President Trump and President Xi. The PRC came out this morning and said, "Look, we're done playing this game. Yeah. We're no longer going to increase tariffs. It's beyond that, and it doesn't make any sense to increase them any further because it's economically not viable for Chinese to sell products in the U.S. and vice versa." And so it'll be interesting to see what the next step is. I think you're going to see this bifurcation of the global economy, right? So China is. I mean, I think they've done a really good job in terms of how they've been responding to the tariffs, and they're doing it in a very political way, right? One can argue if one political way is good versus the other, but for them, I think that as you have these two tensions rising between the two most dominant forces in the global economy, people are going to not pick sides with different countries, but be more aligned with China versus the U.S. And I think that's where China is trying to move to, saying, look, we don't want to play this game anymore. We're not going to do more tariffs. Let's look at other opportunities, and we're open to negotiating. It's just trying to get the two administrations to the table where the U.S. is saying we're open to a phone call. China is saying the exact same thing. It's just a matter of picking up the phone and making that phone call. So.
Yeah, I guess we're all just small cogs in a very, very big bunch of wheels at the end of the day, and especially when you're right in the freight segment of the supply chain, whether you're at the upper end or the lower end or the front end or the back end. It's really, you've just got to work it out. And I think the one thing about the logistics industry that you and I have been around in for many decades is the fact that that resilience factor that everybody always talks about comes into play, that flexibility. And it's often said, but it's very, very true. Never truer said than when situations of dynamic change and disruption do take place. You've just got to be nimble and you've got to survive to thrive. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right. That is exactly right.
Well, Brian, look, really, really appreciate you giving us a few minutes of your valuable time early on a Friday morning where you are, and late on a Friday where I am. I wish you guys well. I know you've got an enormous team working around the world. Been very fortunate to meet some of them, as I say. So we wish you well. Where can folks get hold of Vector Global Logistics? I think we can see upstairs here. You've got a logo there, and your link on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. You can feel free to reach out to us go to our website. I encourage everyone to learn more about it and the good things that we're doing. But Vector Global Logistics is the web address is vectorgl.com. And anybody can feel free to reach me at brian.oxley@vectorgl.com.
Yeah, brilliant. I know you guys are very big players in the conference world as well, and contributing to communities. I want to say a special reach out to you guys in regards to what you're doing in Ukraine and what's been happening there. I know Enrique was a big advocate from the start when we were doing some work there as well. So, and I know you're always happy to consult and give people your opinions and help them out. So, folks, if you need to get hold of Brian or Enrique, do so. You can see where the links are there. And Brian, really appreciate your time again, and we look forward to being in touch and seeing you face to face at some point in the near future.
That sounds perfect. That sounds great. So, very nice. Thanks again for having me, and it's great meeting you.
Thanks, Brian. All the best.
All right. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.